How a whale tooth became Europe's most expensive medicine source credit. Adapted from Greenland Unicorns and the Magical Alicorn by Natalie Lawrence. For centuries, wealthy Europeans kept pieces of unicorn horn beside their food. Some drank from cups made from it. Others ground it into powder and swallowed it as medicine. It was supposed to detect poison, cure disease, restore strength, and even protect its owner from assassination. Kings wanted it. Doctors prescribed it. Apothecaries sold it for extraordinary prices. There was only one problem. The horn did not come from a unicorn. It was the tooth of a whale. And when that truth became impossible to ignore, one 17th-century physician did not abandon unicorn medicine. He simply moved the unicorn into the sea. They weren't stupid. They were certain. This is the story of the Greenland Unicorn. Section 1. The creature everyone knew was real today. The unicorn belongs to fantasy. In medieval and early modern Europe, however, its existence was treated as a serious question of natural history. Ancient writers had described powerful animals with a single horn. The Greek physician Ctesias wrote of wild asses in India with white bodies, dark red heads, blue eyes, and a multicolored horn growing from the forehead. That horn, he claimed, could protect its owner from poison. Other writers described creatures resembling antelope, horses, rhinoceroses, or strange combinations of several animals. The descriptions disagreed about almost everything, but they agreed on one important detail. Somewhere beyond the familiar borders of Europe lived a powerful beast with one horn. Medieval scholars collected these accounts and repeated them in books of animals known as bestiaries. Over time, the unicorn became less like a wild ass or rhinoceros and more like the elegant white horse recognized today. According to the most famous version of the legend, the unicorn was too fierce for any hunter to capture. It could only be subdued by a virgin. The animal would approach her, rest its head in her lap, and allow the waiting hunters to strike. The story eventually acquired Christian meaning. The unicorn came to represent Christ. Its capture represented his willing sacrifice. The virgin represented Mary. The animal was no longer merely strange. It was sacred. Section 2. The magical horn stories also claim that the unicorn possessed the power to defeat poison. In one popular tale, serpents poisoned a pool of water. The other animals waited at its edge, unable to drink. Then the unicorn arrived. It lowered its horn into the water and purified the entire pool. In a world where poisoning was a genuine fear among royalty, that power made unicorn horn incredibly valuable. The substance became known as alicorn. Nobles purchased cups, plates, and utensils supposedly carved from it. If poison touched the material, people believed the alicorn might change color, sweat, or otherwise warn its owner. Powdered alicorn was prescribed for poisoning, fever, weakness, pain, and the effects of old age. It was also sold as an aphrodisiac. Apothecaries displayed unicorns on their signs to advertise that they carried the rare medicine. Collectors placed long spiral horns in their cabinets of wonders. Possessing one demonstrated wealth, education, and access to the distant edges of the known world. These objects appeared to be physical proof that the old stories were true. People had read about unicorn horns for centuries. Now they could see them hanging on a wall. Section 3. The horn from the north. Most of these horns came into Europe through Scandinavian traders. They were long, pale, and naturally twisted into a magnificent spiral. They could reach several feet in length. They looked exactly like something that might have grown from the forehead of a mythical animal, but the traders of the Arctic knew where the objects really came from. They were narwhal tusks. The narwhal is a whale found in northern waters. The famous horn is actually an elongated tooth that grows through the upper lip, most commonly in males. Arctic hunters had traded these tusks for generations. Once they entered European markets, however, their origins became vague. Dealers could sell a narwhal tusk for far more money when it was described as the horn of a unicorn. Some supposed alicorns came from elephants or walruses. Once the ivory had been cut into pieces or crushed into powder, almost no customer could identify the animal from which it had come. The result was a remarkably profitable pharmaceutical market built on mystery. The classical books confirmed the unicorn existed. The church gave it sacred meaning. The horn could be physically examined, and doctors insisted that it worked. For many Europeans, that was more than enough evidence. Section 4 Doubt enters the cabinet. Not everyone was convinced. During the 16th and 17th centuries, European voyages into Arctic waters made the narwhal increasingly familiar to scholars. Descriptions and illustrations of the animal began circulating. The resemblance between narwhal tusks and the supposed unicorn horns in royal collections became difficult to ignore. The French physician Ambroise Paré openly questioned both the existence of the unicorn and the medicinal power of its horn. Other scholars wondered why substances from several completely different animals were all being sold under the same name. If narwhal tusk, walrus tusk, and elephant ivory could each become alicorn, what exactly made the medicine special? The uncertainty threatened more than a favorite legend. It threatened an international trade. Scandinavian merchants profited from selling narwhal tusks. Apothecaries profited from turning them into medicine. Physicians profited from prescribing that medicine to wealthy patients. Too many respectable people had too much invested in the unicorn for it to disappear quietly. Section 5 Ole Worm finds the animal. One of the families drawn into the controversy was the Bartholin family of Denmark. Caspar Bartholin the Elder was a respected physician and professor of medicine at the University of Copenhagen. During his travels across Europe, Caspar visited famous collections filled with rare animals, fossils, artifacts, and supposed unicorn horns. After examining the horns, he concluded that they could not have come from horses or antelope. They had to be marine. Caspar stopped short of directly identifying them as narwhal tusks. His brother-in-law was less cautious. Ole Worm was a physician, scholar, and collector whose cabinet of curiosities became one of the most famous in Europe. In 1636, Worm compared narwhal skeletons with the spiral horns sold as alicorn. The answer was unmistakable. The horns were not horns at all. They were the enormous teeth of narwhals. Ole Worm had identified the true animal, but solving one mystery created several new ones. What creatures had the ancient writers described? Did land-dwelling unicorns still exist somewhere? And if alicorn was merely a whale tooth, why would it possess magical healing powers? Section 6. The Great Rebranding. Caspar Bartholin's son, Thomas Bartholin, attempted to answer those questions. Thomas was a physician. He was also unwilling to surrender the medical reputation of Alicorn. In 1645, he published a book called New Observations about the Unicorn. The book examined nearly every creature or object associated with a single horn. It discussed rhinoceroses, horned birds, insects, snakes, sea creatures, and even human-made objects. Thomas accepted that the famous spiral alicorns came from narwhals, but he did not conclude that unicorn medicine was fraudulent. Instead, he changed the definition of the unicorn. The true medicinal unicorn, Thomas argued, was not a white horse wandering through an eastern forest. It was an Arctic sea creature. The narwhal became the sea unicorn. More specifically, it became the Greenland unicorn. The discovery that should have destroyed the legend was used to rescue it. The horn was still genuine. The medicine was still powerful. Europe had simply been imagining the animal incorrectly. Thomas had performed one of history's most creative acts of rebranding. Section 7. Ancient Wisdom and New Experiments. Thomas Bartholin supported his argument using both old authority and new science. Classical Greek and Roman authors had mostly described unicorns living on land. Thomas therefore turned to medieval Norse writings. One of his sources was the King's Mirror, a 13th-century educational text written for a Norwegian prince. The book discussed the creatures and natural wonders of the northern world. Thomas argued that the Norse had known about these sea unicorns and understood the extraordinary power of their horns. Old texts mattered enormously in 17th-century scholarship. If an idea could be connected to ancient wisdom, it gained credibility. But Thomas did not rely only on books. He also conducted experiments with powdered narwhal tusk. He believed these tests demonstrated that the substance could treat illness. At one point, he apparently became convinced that unicorn remedies had helped stop a fever epidemic in Copenhagen. To Thomas, this was observational evidence. The medicine had been administered. Patients had recovered. Therefore, the medicine appeared to work. There were no controlled clinical trials. There was no reliable method for separating the effects of the powder from natural recovery, other treatments, or coincidence. But Thomas was working during a period when experimental science was still developing. He was trying to test an old claim. The problem was that he interpreted every apparent success as confirmation. Section 8. The Price of Belief. Thomas Bartholin's argument protected several valuable interests. As a physician, he could continue prescribing Alicorn to wealthy patients. Scandinavian traders could continue selling narwhal tusks at premium prices. Denmark could preserve an important Arctic trade. And European collectors did not have to admit that one of their most prized wonders was simply a whale tooth. The Greenland Unicorn allowed everyone to accept the new evidence without abandoning the old belief. The horn came from a narwhal. That was now proven. But the narwhal was a unicorn. Therefore, the horn remained alicorn, and alicorn remained medicine. An elaborately illustrated second edition of Thomas Bartholin's book appeared in 1678. Its images helped keep the sea unicorn alive in European scholarship. For several more decades, the narwhal continued to occupy a strange position between animal, medicine, and myth. Section 9. What finally proved them wrong? The Greenland unicorn did not disappear because someone produced a single devastating argument. It faded as experiments became more reliable. Pharmacists and physicians gradually discovered that powdered narwhal tusk did not cure disease. It did not neutralize poison. It did not restore youth. It was ivory. By the early 18th century, Alicorn was losing its medical reputation. In 1735, the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus published the first edition of Systema Naturae. The new systems of classification placed animals into an increasingly organized natural world. The unicorn found no secure place within it. The narwhal survived. The medicinal sea unicorn did not. A substance once stored in royal treasuries and sold by respected apothecaries became evidence of an age when folklore, religion, commerce, and early science had been almost impossible to separate. Section 10. The real lesson of the Greenland unicorn. The people who believed in Alicorn were not all fools or criminals. Some merchants certainly understood that mystery increased the price. Some sellers undoubtedly took advantage of their customers, but many educated physicians and scholars sincerely believed they were studying a real medicine. They possessed ancient testimony. They had physical specimens. They had reports from patients who recovered. They had respected authorities who defended the treatment. And they lived in a world where the boundaries between observation and legend had not yet been firmly drawn. When evidence revealed that the horn belonged to a whale, Thomas Bartholin did not reject the evidence. He absorbed it into the belief. The unicorn did not vanish. It learned to swim. That is what makes the Greenland unicorn more than an amusing story about people buying powdered whale teeth. It demonstrates how a belief can survive even after its original explanation collapses. The details can change. The definitions can be rewritten. Contradictory evidence can become supporting evidence. And when reputation, money, tradition, and professional authority all depend upon the same claim, admitting error becomes extraordinarily difficult. For centuries, Europeans searched distant forests for unicorns. Then they discovered that the horns had come from the Arctic Ocean. For a little while longer, they chose to believe that unicorns had been there all along. They weren't stupid. They were certain. Narration end end card dead wrong history the Greenland unicorn they weren't stupid. They were certain. A Dustbound Studios production.